What if I told you that Europe once feared an African empire so powerful that it controlled gold, trade, and global economics? Yet most history books barely mention it. This empire was richer than England, France, and Spain combined, and its name was Mali. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear was never meant to be remembered. When people think of ancient power, they think of Rome, Greece, or Egypt. But in the 1300s, the most powerful empire on earth was in West Africa. Not Europe, not Asia, Africa. The Mali Empire rose in the 13th century, covering parts of modern-day Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, and Niger. At its peak, Mali controlled over half of the world's gold supply. Gold wasn't just wealth, it was power. Mali sat at the center of trans-Saharan trade routes, connecting Africa to Europe and the Middle East. Everything passed through Mali: gold, salt, knowledge, culture. The Mali Empire wasn't just large, it was strategically brilliant. Its leaders controlled trade routes that stretched across the Sahara Desert, connecting salt mines in the north to gold mines in the south. Salt was as valuable as gold, and gold flowed freely through Mali's cities. Merchants and traders from Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East traveled hundreds of miles just to exchange goods. The empire's cities were thriving hubs of culture and knowledge. Markets overflowed with spices, textiles, and treasures, while scholars copied manuscripts and shared wisdom that rivaled any library in Europe. One city stood out above the rest: Timbuktu. Nestled along the Niger River, it became the beating heart of Mali's intellectual power. Its libraries held tens of thousands of handwritten manuscripts covering science, law, medicine, astronomy, and religion. Even in the 14th century, while much of Europe was in the Dark Ages, Mali's citizens were educated, wealthy, and influential. The empire's reputation spread far and wide, leaving visitors awestruck at the power and sophistication of West Africa. And then came Mansa Musa, the emperor who would become the richest man in human history. Born in 1280, he ruled the Mali Empire at its peak. Under his reign, Mali wasn't just a kingdom, it was a global powerhouse. Gold wasn't just a symbol of wealth, it was power. And Mansa Musa had more of it than anyone could imagine. In 1324, he embarked on a pilgrimage to Mecca. But this wasn't a simple journey. It was a procession of epic proportions. Thousands of soldiers, servants, and camels accompanied him, each carrying gold, ivory, and precious gifts. When he reached Cairo, the magnitude of his wealth shocked the city. He gave away so much gold that the local economy was destabilized. Prices of gold dropped for years and entire merchants' markets were overwhelmed. Mansa Musa didn't just demonstrate wealth, he demonstrated Mali's power and influence. His pilgrimage made Mali known across Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe. Scholars, travelers, and traders returned home with tales of a kingdom that rivaled any in the world. But Mansa Musa's greatness wasn't only about gold. He invested in education, building mosques, schools, and libraries throughout Mali. Timbuktu became a center of learning, attracting scholars from across the Islamic world. Mali was wealthy, powerful, and intellectually unmatched. By the end of his reign, the empire's reputation as a hub of wealth and knowledge was unparalleled in the world. Mansa Musa had not only changed Mali, he had changed how the world saw Africa. But Mali wasn't just rich, it was intelligent. The city of Timbuktu housed universities, libraries, and scholars from across the world. At a time when Europe was struggling through the Dark Ages, Timbuktu had hundreds of thousands of handwritten manuscripts on science, math, medicine, and astronomy. Education was valued. Knowledge was currency. While Mansa Musa dazzled the world with gold, Timbuktu was shining with knowledge. This city, nestled along the Niger River, became the beating heart of Mali's intellectual empire. Its libraries held tens of thousands of manuscripts, handwritten on parchment, covering science, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, law, and religion. Scholars from across Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe traveled there to study. Education wasn't just a privilege, it was a foundation of power. Mali's leaders understood that wealth without knowledge could not last. Timbuktu's universities and madrasas ensured that every generation produced learned citizens, traders, and diplomats. Imagine a city where scholars debated complex mathematics, astronomers charted the stars, and doctors wrote detailed medical texts, all while much of Europe was still in the Dark Ages. Timbuktu was a hub of enlightenment, a city where wisdom was currency as valuable as gold. Yet despite its brilliance, much of Timbuktu's story was hidden from the world. Libraries were secret, manuscripts carefully preserved, and knowledge passed down quietly, away from colonial eyes. Timbuktu wasn't just a city, it was a symbol of African innovation, intellect, and enduring cultural legacy. So why don't we hear about Mali? Because acknowledging African power destroyed the colonial narrative that Africa was backward or uncivilized. To justify colonization, Europe had to erase Africa's past. Empires like Mali didn't fit the story, so they were buried. Despite its wealth, power, and knowledge, the Mali Empire and Africa's brilliance in general was largely erased from mainstream history. When European colonizers began expanding into Africa centuries later, they needed a narrative to justify their conquests. Portraying Africa as backward and uncivilized made it easier to dominate and exploit its people and resources. Empires like Mali didn't fit this story. The truth, that African kingdoms were rich, powerful, and highly educated, challenged the colonial agenda. So, carefully, systematically, much of this history was ignored or rewritten in textbooks. Maps minimized African empires. Scholars' manuscripts were hidden or destroyed. Cities like Timbuktu, once vibrant hubs of learning, became symbols of forgotten Africa, rather than celebrated centers of culture and knowledge. But the story survives. Through oral traditions, preserved manuscripts, and modern research, we can now uncover the untold legacy of Africa's greatest empires and remind the world that history is much richer than what we were taught. Africa was not discovered. Africa was dominating. From the wealth of Mansa Musa to the intellectual power of Timbuktu, the Mali Empire proves that Africa has a history richer, older, and more powerful than most people were ever taught. If this shocked you, hit the like button, subscribe for more untold stories, and comment AFRICA if you want us to uncover more hidden empires, forgotten kings, and lost civilizations. Because history didn't forget Africa, it was hidden.